Please join me in welcoming him to the stage. So now I pass the mic to you, Larry.
Thank you very much for the introduction. There we go. The title of my talk today is The Digital Redesign of Higher Education. And I call it that because I think we're in a moment of transition. And anytime large-scale institutions, and particularly higher education, is in a moment where it experiences rapid change, there's naturally some fear, some resistance, some opportunities as well. And so I want to set the stage for what I think is happening globally with higher education to understand how we can take advantage of this digital redesign that's just begun. And to give you a framework for this, I use Martin Tro's conceptions, a professor at UC Berkeley in the 1970s, who came up with the framework that's almost universally accepted, that the tendency in national higher education systems is to move from elite systems of higher education, educating the few, to mass systems of education for a modern economy, towards universal systems of higher education. And so my framework for understanding open education is that we're part of this transition, as has been distance learning, from elite to mass to universal higher education. And so briefly, I'll just describe some of the elements of this transition that we're going through. The idea of elite education is probably familiar to everybody. It's the top university of the country that educates the next generation of leaders, of leadership of the country, and that primarily, as opposed to the technical skills in engineering or computer science, the goal of elite systems was to develop the character of the student so that the culture of a country was maintained, as well as the generally accepted notion of the dominant ruling group within any country. But particularly after the Second World War, we saw rapid economic development occurring in many parts of the world. And this required new kinds of education because we needed managers in the factories. We needed technicians. We needed engineers to build bridges. And so in this transition from elite to mass, you get the idea that a much larger strata of the population needs to be involved. And particularly in Asia, there are a number of countries that have really used higher education to advance their national economic development and have been very, very successful at doing that, emerging from the destruction of the Second World War into becoming increasingly important players in the global economy. But then we shift into another phase. And you can begin to see it in the UNESCO Declaration in 2012 around open educational resources. And there's the beginning of the notion that higher education, as was the case with primary education or secondary education, is increasingly a right for everybody to enjoy. And so access to higher education becomes important, and the criteria begins to shift for what we want to do. So increasingly we're concerned, as we try to educate everybody to their potential, is we want to look at higher education for how it changes the individual and how it adds value to their lives, how it increases opportunity for them. And so all of a sudden we get this change in the systems of higher education from elite to mass to universal. And in California, where Martin Troe was at UC Berkeley, and he was able to observe the California Master Plan for Higher Education that created 3 public systems. The University of California, a research university. I'm proud to be part of it, from the University of California, Irvine. But also the California State University, whose role was to educate the middle group of high school students based on their qualifications and scores. And then the California community colleges that were 2-year institutions and were entitled to admit everybody. And when the California Master Plan began, tuition, the charging of fees for tuition, was illegal. So all of a sudden you have some of the elements of what we're talking about now. We have the idea of universal education. The California community colleges there were so many of them that literally within a few miles of your house, you could go to a school for at least 2 years and then transfer to the California State University system or to the University of California. And you could attend school for free. And so free is, of course, a very important notion when we talk about open educational resources. We use it for reducing costs. We use it for expanding access. And here we had Martin Troe developing this notion because he could physically see colleges being built to enable everyone to attend college who wants to. So if we look at this, we understand that the rapid growth of the higher education sector is such that we can't accept everybody who wants to come to a physical university. If you look at the numbers, I think for Malaysia between 1998 and 2011, there was something like a 50% increase in the percentage of students between 18 and 24 who are attending higher education. You can expect that number, and I'll make a prediction. You can expect that number in Malaysia to double in the next 10 years, that the percentage will go twice as fast as it was for the last 13 years or so. It will actually double. And the reason is that in the economy today, higher education is increasingly the gateway to a better life. And so students from all walks of life increasingly want to be able to attend, and increasingly the old jobs that used to exist are very hard to, that the expansion of those jobs won't occur at the same rate. And so the jobs that they need will require increasingly technical, scientific skills in the future. And so they have to look to the universities to meet that need. And yet we don't have enough lecture halls like this. We don't have enough classrooms. And we can't build rapidly enough to accommodate them. And there's another problem that creates. So all of a sudden you have this notion that more and more students are going to be coming to our doors. But we are able to admit students more rapidly than we're able to turn out qualified academics, people with master's degrees and PhDs. And so what UNESCO has noted is that the average qualification for academics has been declining as more and more students come through our doors. So this is a second problem, the second challenge that has to be met. And it has to be met by mechanisms by which we not only educate students, but we also educate to higher and higher levels lecturers who will be in front of the students, whether virtually or in the classroom. So we need universal education for all of these purposes to raise the level of teaching and the level of learning. And so I mentioned before the UNESCO statistics from 1998 to 2011, the last year for which the numbers are available. And you can see that the blue line is 1998. Well, maybe you can't see it. It's a little hard to see. But then the red line is 2011. And so you can see on the average, globally, we've gone from 20% as the average for enrollment between 18 and 24 to something like 32%. And so we can see that rapid advance, one that's only going to accelerate. By the way, another reason for the acceleration is the improvements that we're making in primary and secondary systems. So we're actually feeding the pipeline for more students in the future. And it's part of active government policies around the world. So we don't have to guess that this increase in higher education is going to happen. We know that it's going to happen. So distance learning, if we understand distance learning, it was a response to this massification of higher education, of the need to allow more and more students to access it. So it was mentioned in the introduction that I'm on the board of directors of the African Virtual University. I help to link them up with global educational, with universities around the world. But as a project, it's been ongoing since the mid-90s. And increasingly successful. They're in a second phase in which they're preparing a computer science degree through 35 university partners throughout Africa. And the goal of the African Virtual University will be to become an accredited university. Why? Because in Africa, there are still places like Benin where only 1% of 18 to 24-year-olds are enrolled in the university. And so they need to expand that, and yet they don't have the budget. They don't have the capability, and they're asking increasingly, the French-speaking countries in particular, are asking the AVU to grant degrees themselves through distance education. So as we look at the infrastructure, their first project they did in a number of countries, including Somalia, for example, where 2 universities participated. And you can see the satellite dish for the internet access. You see the backup generator for electricity when they need it. And you see the classroom behind them. So if they're providing distance education as a mechanism for increasing access to higher education in Somalia, which was a conflict zone, we can safely say that through technology, we can reach everybody everywhere, in rural areas as well as in urban centers. And here you can see the training of the faculty and how to teach at a distance, which is another step you have to take. And finally, some students actually in a distance learning classroom. So they have to use the classroom for the internet access, but there's a server in each of the countries, a server in Nairobi that they coordinate at night so that the scores the students are receiving are recorded. Any of the lectures that need to be downloaded are synchronized with the local servers. And then if there's any interruption of connection, there's no problem because the next time it connects, there'll be a resynchronization. And you can see that in distance education, it really is a nice match for what UNESCO saw as the 3 major trends in global higher education in their 2009 report. They saw that universities were looking to enhance revenues. Well, in this case, distance education is a form of reducing costs. You don't have to build physical classrooms. It responds to the globalization of higher education by allowing people to seek out new markets. And by new markets, we don't have to think about an elite school offering a degree in another country. We can also think about new markets as how do we reach the rural areas of our own country? How do we reach students who have not traditionally been able to access higher education? And it responds to the massification of higher education, the increasing numbers, and the problems of the qualifications, the average qualifications of academics, by allowing baseline instructional quality to be determined by course design. The design of both the content and the the sequence of activities in a course becomes a way in which we can say, here's the baseline. By that I don't mean a baseline that's low. We can set a baseline that's much higher than before and enforce it, and then it's up to the lecturers or the instructors to actually take it beyond the baseline. But at a minimum, we've raised the level of instruction. And so this is the, so here I have the slide for Malaysia, and you see the gross enrollment ratios, the 18 to 24-year-olds. And you can basically see how the green line is tertiary, the red line is secondary, and the blue line is primary education. And so what happens is all of those are trending upwards. You can see how the tertiary line is actually trending upwards more rapidly than the others. And this is true internationally. The rate of growth for higher education will be faster than the rate of growth for secondary, and certainly for primary, where it's almost universal. Okay, so then I'm trying to develop a framework in which we look at open education, open courseware, open educational resources, MOOCs, and we look at it in the framework of open education plus. So there's, of course, the side that we've always had, that's content. And if I can just say an aside right now, when we look at MIT's decision in 2002, its announcement of the Open Courseware Initiative, they were doing this as part of a faculty, a set of faculty consultations and committees that were meeting on the future of higher education in the era of the internet. And so what they were really doing, there was an open charge from the president of MIT, Charles Vest at the time, who said, what should we do? And left it open to the faculty to decide. And the faculty finally decided that the answer in the age of the internet was to publish everything. Put out everything for everybody at the same time. And later I'm going to talk about what MIT is doing today, because they've just issued now their latest report on the future of MIT. And I think that it bears some of the same important changes that we saw in 2002 with the declaration of the Open Courseware Initiative. But finally, we had at least the idea of open content, that an MIT education didn't have to stop at the doors of MIT, that USM can now allow everyone in Malaysia, everyone in the world to enjoy the benefits of its educational system, etc. So we had open content at the beginning of the movement. And the Open Education Consortium has aggregated all of these resources so that there's now visible, at least, there's more, but visible, there's 30,000 modules that you can find in the search. Various languages, English, Spanish is one of the top ones, Mandarin is one of the top languages. But you can now find 30,000. In fact, the problem with 30,000 is that's too much. It's really hard to find what you're looking for when there's 30,000 results. So even though there's ways of searching and getting a few more, we still have a lot of work to do on open content so that somebody who wants to find what they need can find it very clearly, and that it can be of high quality. So we have repositories like Merlot. It's not truly a repository because it just uses links to refer to where the resources are, but we have repositories like Connections, Merlot. We have in the open content field open textbooks. So part of cost reduction in the United States has particularly been the availability of free open textbooks in a variety of subjects from a variety of different projects. Not just the United States and Canada, the British Columbian government has also been releasing dozens and dozens of open textbooks that have lowered the cost, because now students, instead of spending hundreds of dollars on commercially released textbooks are able to get the same quality for free, particularly in the introductory courses. So that's one piece, is open content. The other piece is now increasingly open learning. And we've all listened to the talk about MOOCs. I'm going to talk a lot more about this, but it's the combination of scale. And I actually don't like the term MOOC. It was just Dave Cormier, a Canadian, was sitting there with George Siemens and folks at Athabasca, and they were initiating the first MOOC course, but they didn't know what to call it. And so they're sitting there brainstorming, and he came up with the idea, well, it's massive, it's open, it's online, and it's a course. So they called it MOOC, and the name stuck. So now we're stuck with the name as well. But the problem is, what we're really talking about is education at scale. And so that can take, rather than the specific form that the MOOCs, Coursera, edX have used, we want to think about, when we do something at scale, what does that permit us to do in the future? And in particular, the area that I'm interested in is, how do we do things at scale so we can have small groups be effective? So how can we actually translate some of the tasks of higher education into that area so that everything else has an adaptation, has changes that have made it much more effective? So we also have the idea of open study. And this is the notion that there can be online study groups going through material together. So the key, of course, for all education is to have students motivated and engaged. And there's usually no better way, nothing that's more effective, than working together with their peers. So if you look at the research in STEM education, they found that peer study, qualified peer-led study groups, are more effective than lectures. And so the ability for, especially as you talk about a national strategy that incorporates this, you have the natural ability, because of common languages and so forth, to be able to say across institutions, can we organize peer study in a way that there are trained leaders who are students? Why students? Because the idea is, you get a student who's been successful in the class and they remember everything about it. They remember what was hard, what was difficult for them. They remember how they had to study. So all of those things can be transmitted, but we need to have a conscious strategy towards peer study as part of Open Education Plus. At UCI, we're going to do a project in supplemental instruction. And this is, again, peer-led study groups. The idea is to tell students not that they are at risk of failing because they have low grades or had bad test scores when they came into the university, but to tell them there are courses that are high-risk courses. The courses are at risk. The courses have high fail rates. And that when using peer-led study groups, we know that on the average, we can raise the grades of the students by a half grade on the average. And so when we do this, by the way, when you have a student who's struggling and you tell them, come join a study group, you're doing badly. Guess what? They do worse. If you tell them that that's what's happening with them, they actually accept it, and then they go on to fail. So what you have to do is you have to say, this is not for students who are struggling generally, who have some demographic that puts them at risk. You have to tell them that this is, every student can raise their grade by half, and it's open to all. And then there's no stigma for this kind of participation. And they're in touch with a student all the time who can tell them how to succeed. They model being a good student. They model the organizational skills. At what time do I study? Should I cram before an exam? Should I study all night? So you need somebody who's been through the experience to tell you what successful study practices there are, as well as somebody who got a very good grade in the course and remembers how to help you. And then supplemental instruction does one other thing. They ask, instead of being preset, it's not another lecture. They ask the students in the study group to bring their questions and to bring their problems. And they work from that point. So what we're going to do at University of California, Irvine is we're going to create one of the classic supplemental instruction groups with our face-to-face students in chemistry. But then we're going to offer, because we already have a program called Open Chem, which are the chemistry lectures available in their entirety online, we're going to have an open study group that invites all students who are taking chemistry to participate in what we hope are similar benefits. But in any case, we want to test that out. We want to move from what's successful in the residential space to what's successful online. And finally, there's the issue of open teaching. So right now, when you create a chemistry course or anything else, you do it as a professor by yourself. And sometimes you're a very inspired person, and you inspire your students. And sometimes some of the professors, some of the lecturers aren't so inspired. But in any case, it seems to me that what we need in teaching is to get people to talk to each other. We're going to teach introductory physics. So right now there's an experiment that Dave Cormier, the guy who termed MOOCs, and Piotr Mitros, who is the chief scientist at edX, are doing to create a co-created course. So they're doing a MOOC with not just professors, but with professors of physics about how to teach introductory physics, but also with software engineers, user interface specialists, graphic designers, everybody that they would need on a team to actually develop each module, so that the notion is that the best MOOC that you can create will be one that's designed using all of the knowledge of a community, but broken down so we ask the question for each specific step in learning physics, what is the best way to teach that? So it combines content with software. And that's what we're calling the co-creation model. It's in use in many ways. In Colombia, in South America, there's a project with 12 primary teachers in a very poor community in a rural area, that they're building their own OERs because they're asking the question together, how should we teach our children? So we get then to the idea that there are these various open education strategies. And there's a number of strategies on the international level that the Open Education Consortium is very involved in. So we have been at the stage of content aggregation, just adding more and more. And now the important thing for us is to curate it. So what would be a wonderful project by anyone is to take one area, anthropology, and go through all of the modules available with an international team, because there's multiple languages, and again figuring out what would be the optimal curriculum in anthropology with the opportunity to adapt that to specific audiences. So this is the notion of curation. So that's one international strategy that can be followed. Another international strategy is to build these things, is to build out open educational opportunities and to create learning hubs where people meet up in Penang, in Kuala Lumpur, in New York City, and they have these study groups that actually meet physically to work together on that. I should be remiss if I don't mention that open education is also part of foreign policy. So the question for Malaysia becomes, how is Malaysia perceived for the quality of its education, And how does Malaysia set foot on the global stage of higher education so that the association of Malaysia is with quality, with an engaged student community, and with top professors. And so that's the combination. So right now, the vehicles for that have often been Coursera or edX, where people join because they can put their best foot forward. But there's a lot more opportunities than that, but it really requires a coherent national strategy to say, this is how we're going to proceed. And also then, here's how we would help other institutions internationally. So in Brazil, where the language is Portuguese, they established universities in Mozambique, in Angola, in Guinea-Bissau because of the common language, and they developed programs of exchange with those communities. And open educational resources is one of the vehicles for that. There are national strategies. We talked before about having a baseline instructional quality so that you're raising everybody up at the same time. There's the expansion of access that we talked about. But there's also workforce development. So again, a lot of my experience has been in Africa, where the proposal for MOOCs by the African Virtual University will not target university-educated people. Because the rate of participation is very low, something around 7%, 8% in sub-Saharan Africa, their goal will be to get all those people who could not get accepted at a university, who had good scores, good grades, but there wasn't enough space. And to approach them because they have to become part of the skilled workforce that Africa needs. So the idea of massive education that will have to be optimized for mobile will be based on that. But the idea that a certificate will carry value and actually enable you to get a job in a given field makes a lot of sense in that circumstance. And again, another national, with the era of tight budgets everywhere, cost reduction becomes important as we expand access. So we're not just reducing costs to cut the budget of the university, we want to actually bring more students in. That's the purpose of cost reduction. And finally, an institutional strategy. So an institution, of course, in higher education, everything is reputational. And the ability of your professors and your students alike to gain reputation through their participation. The reality is when any of the MOOCs, when any of the open courseware projects get somebody from outside of the usual of the United States or Europe to participate and to clearly have gotten some benefit, immediately they put it up on their website and they say, see? But it's important to actually then set foot on that global stage as well in terms of becoming equals with the others. Because higher education and the transference of knowledge is easy to reproduce, especially now that the internet provides such easy access. It's also for institutional change. Even at Harvard and MIT, the goal of the MOOCs was not to dominate the world. The goal of the MOOCs was to transform education at the institution itself. And particularly to get away from the large lecture halls. Unfortunately, I'm giving a lecture as I say this, so it's a little contradictory. But also there's corporate strategies. And so they're looking at standardization of training, reduction of costs themselves. There's alternate certification available. The Vice Chancellor mentioned badges. Mozilla, for example, sends all of its employees through peer-to-peer university, an open education institution, for their education. So at Mozilla, you have to go through there. And the only way to get your foot in the door at Mozilla for a job is to show through your badges, through those awards of merit from other students, that you could practice teamwork, that you had good knowledge and were able to help others. Those kinds of things were the only things that get you in through the door. So additionally, corporations are beginning to look at alternate certification. And when we look at the audiences for open education, we've already known independent learners, our own current students, our prospective students, those who will be coming in the door. So for example, one requirement that may be true in the future of most institutions will be, before we admit you, take a course from us. We want to know that you can be a successful student, and so we want to see how you do in a course first. And so you can see higher education can now change so that open education is aimed at all the people who might want to come here to attend the university. I mentioned skilled workforce development as an audience. And then finally, I want to talk about vulnerable communities. So OpenCourseWare and MOOCs have shared one similar problem. The people who most take advantage of open educational resources are the most highly educated. So you look at the numbers and whether it's OpenCourseWare surveys or Coursera or edX, and they all come out with numbers like 60, 70, 80% have college degrees already. Many of them are advanced, and the ones that aren't are still in high school but are advanced students in high school. And so what we need to do is to talk about how open education can be used for vulnerable communities. Very briefly, I'll mention a project in Haiti in the area of public health where the clinics needed to train the people who worked in the clinics to recognize very simple symptoms and be able to give accurate advice. And so what they needed, we found for them, the committee in the consortium found for them a project that OpenU UK had done in Ethiopia, which was a full public health curriculum written for community workers in clinics, exactly the same group. Unfortunately, it's in English, but it's written and so in Haiti you have a language problem. It's not a problem, it's that in the household people speak Creole, but the language of the schools is French. And so if you go to the community clinics and you give them something written in English or even something written in French, they're not going to understand. Even written in Creole, they may not understand. So they are transforming what began as a project in Ethiopia. They're selecting the topics they want, and then they're going to provide through video on inexpensive tablets the education that the community workers need to help their communities. So increasingly, and I know Professor Karim is in the area of food technology, I'm looking at food safety and food security as being one of the areas in which open educational resources will become an important part of the solution to those problems. And I expect Professor Karim to lead the work. Sorry. So we're talking about the impact on the university. And I don't know how much, I don't see a clock and I don't know how much time I have, if I have any. But this is, again, from MIT's report. They were looking at that already at MIT, many classes have broken out of the lecture format. So looking at an existing characteristic. They were looking at 300 courses that might be available to be delivered by MOOCs. Undergraduates, more than graduate students, but undergraduates were really interested in taking a class before they got to MIT. They were increasingly interested in shifting time for study. They were interested in changing the space. One of the proposals of the faculty committee is to take this room and to break it up so that smaller groups can meet and that the work of the lecture would be done in other ways, while the students were preparing projects, problems, meeting in more intimate environments with their professors. So spaces would change under this. And when you look at preferred learning formats, you again have the fact that there's been a change in generations, and that most undergraduates want to have some online components to a course. And especially when we talk about people completing degrees, we want to enhance flexibility. So,
Dr. Larry, you have 5 more minutes.
I have 5 minutes. Okay. I'll speak really quickly. So, what I'm also proposing is that higher education needs to collect data. That's not the whole story of higher education, but we really need to, at every step of the way, measure what we're doing. And so we have this input, which are students who walk through our doors, and they come through with qualifying test scores, good grade point averages. And in this digital transition, we're going from the format where there's lectures, but if you look at what happens outside the lecture hall, we're already in a digital environment. We have a learning management system. We have a place where we go for our course assignments. We have the readings posted as PDFs. And when we want to communicate with our professors, most of the time, we don't go to their office. We send an email. And so already we're in a digital environment as soon as they get out of the lecture hall. And if we change the lecture hall itself, because it's not the most effective form of teaching and learning, we'll see that everything becomes digital. So what would be the case now that is, as opposed to that lecture, they would have a learning community. They would be interacting with social media. Oh, I can actually look at my computer here instead of looking backwards. There would be communities of interest. There would be search capabilities, all the things that they do already outside of the lecture hall. The other thing we want to get from data, though, is at the University of Michigan, they asked the question, what's the best predictor of fourth-year grades? So how can we predict in advance what you're going to get in year 4? So it turns out, I raised my hand when I heard this, and I said family income, because it is a good predictor. But the best is your first quarter grades. When you enter the university, and when you leave the university, your grades are going to look pretty much the same. And so then we begin to have to question, what did we do in those 4 years? How did we really change outcomes? Why is it that a student who had poorer grades, relatively speaking, at the beginning, didn't accelerate so that they ended up in roughly equal position? It's a complex answer, but I'm raising the question, and I'm suggesting that the only way that we even know to ask the question is to have the data. And our output has to be fully qualified graduates. And so between that point, between entering and leaving, we have to know what is efficient and what's effective and how every single student is doing. And the student must know how they are doing. So the idea of a student dashboard that really indicates progress in course, progress towards degree, all of those things at their fingertips, as much as the administration needs it and the professor needs it. We need to design interventions for a student who's not doing well. But we have to ask then about courses. Are they efficient and are they effective? So to get good data, we require scale. So the notion of having MOOCs that everybody in Malaysia might take in common is going to give you a data set that is the envy of the rest of the world. So when I was listening to it, I was thinking about this. I said, I have a slide for that. But the other thing is that the key criteria for student success is engagement, student engagement. And student engagement comes from exciting and interesting professors and intellectual environment, but it also comes from other students, and we have to leverage those other students online. Right now, the peer assessment piece of MOOCs doesn't work very well. We have to do better than that. So I'll just leave you that with the goals of the Open Education Consortium, we see that how many people are going to be entering higher education by 2025. We know we can't build the buildings. So we're looking at, instead of opening up 4 new universities, the size of this university every week for the next 15 years, we're proposing open education. And employers need increasingly skilled workers. And so the opportunity for us are to decrease costs per student, to increase access, and to increase the higher to make a higher percentage of educated individuals worldwide. So I know that I've gone over my time. So I just want to leave you with that thought that all of the solutions to the most urgent problems will only come from a highly educated global population. If we're going to address climate change, public health, sustainability, the only way we can do it is by working hand in hand together in these global education communities to actually solve real problems. And so I'm just going to skip through the rest, but I'm going to skip everything I was going to say about the University of California, Irvine, but it was fantastic. So in any case, I want to thank you for your attention, and I look forward to carrying the conversation forward with you during the breaks. Please come up and let's talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Larry, for the enriching presentation.